All right, so happy to have the esteemed panel here this afternoon. We have Lisa Brown, who's a VP of Advancement in External Relations with the university, so welcome. No stranger to social enterprise, for sure. Rob McLennan, wave. Ayan Shahed, and Craig Rowe from Clear Risk, and Mary Lynn Taylor from Choices for Youth. So this is called Newfoundland Social Procurement in Action. And so everybody's got something different to bring to the table, I'm sure. And I know Lisa has moderated a panel that I've been on before, and she's good at digging out information and asking all the right questions. So over to you, Lisa, and welcome everybody.
Thank you very much, and welcome everyone. I'm really delighted to be here. I was at one point CEO of Stella Circle, so I feel like I'm back home with looking at these folks here. And so really delighted to be here and talk about this. It's a really important topic to talk about, and one that can have a lot of impact, I think, in our province. So delighted to be here. So I hope that this is a very organic conversation that we can have involving both the panel and all of you. And so if you have any questions at any time, please just give a wave and I'll be looking for you. So a conversation versus like a firing squad sort of thing, you know? But to start, why don't we just get you very briefly to kind of introduce yourselves, what your organization does, and we can go from there. And if we just spend really no more than 2 minutes per person on that, I think that would be great, because we'll get into the meat of the matter later on. Marnie, do you want to start?
So my name is Mary Lynn Taylor. I am here today with Choices for Youth. I am the the manager of retail and production. So we operate 2 social enterprises in our portfolio of 4, and that would be Neighborhood Thrift Store and the shop, which is a small-scale production facility. We work to provide equitable employment opportunity for youth facing self-identified barriers, working with Choices for Youth, of course, to achieve their overarching mandate of helping to end and prevent homelessness with young people in St. John's. Been with the organization for 5 years, and I love this work.
And I'm going to interrupt you and tell you that you also started my favorite store in St. John's, of course.
You did. That is true. So I was nudged by David last night to stop saying I wear 2 hats and that I wear one very big one. So I am an entrepreneur at my core. I run 4 other businesses in private sector outside of here, and I'm very interested in the area where private and public meet, as many of you have heard me talk about. So look forward to the conversation.
Shout out to Model Citizens. I wish I'd worn a dress or some of my clothing that I'd purchased there, but I wasn't thinking this morning. So anyway.
Come to me later for a 10% coupon.
You heard it. You heard it. All right. Yeah. Craig.
Thanks. You didn't tell us what you do in all your spare time. Craig Rowe, CEO, founder of Clear Risk. I guess I'm here because we're just about finished, hopefully, our B Corp certification. So hoping to talk a little bit about that today, and why it's important to us, and why I think that we're really primarily doing it because we were doing it anyway, so we just decided to get the certification to make it easier for people to know what we do, and to set an example for others, because I think that that's important. And I've got a long history in some charitable work, especially at the YMCA at all levels. And I think I always call the YMCA the original social enterprise.
Good comment. Ayan.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ayan Shahed. I'm the VP of Innovation for Seafair Capital. So Seafair is a group of organizations, and all of them are kind of unified by this notion of unlocking potential. So our organizations are really about community impact and social impact, and broadly kind of play in the space of healthcare and community-based care. So that whole continuum of how care happens out in the world. A number of our organizations are really focused on actual delivery of care outside of acute settings, so in community. And we're also building out some solutions and organizations that focus on kind of what do the systems need to look like, what does technology look like, logistics, supply chain, kind of things in the background that make healthcare work really well. So we're excited to be here. This is a really important conversation to us. Certainly it aligns with our values as a group. Healthcare is critically important, but the link between social and health, really social determinants of health, is a really simple way to summarize that up. But I think as we think about procurement, it's really important that we think about being progressive in that space, and so we're excited to share some of our message and learnings in that arena. So thanks.
Thank you. And Rob McLennan.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lisa said as Rob McLennan, and I'm Director of Employment Services with Stella Circle. Stella Circle is a large community agency in St. John's that delivers programs and services holistically across 3 pillars to about 1,000 individuals every year. So we are Real Work, which is the area of my responsibility, which is employment services and social enterprise. We're Real Homes, so we work with people to ensure that they're adequately, safely supported in their housing, and Real Help, which is our clinical, residential, mental health and addictions services. So my arm is really all about generating opportunities for people who've really been underrepresented and marginalized with respect to opportunities in the labor market and preparing for the labor market. So, we've seen the benefits, and as Anne said, the social determinants of health really playing out when people have meaningful activity that they feel respected and included, and that's what this conversation is about for me today.
All right, fantastic. Thank you so much. And so when we talk about social procurement, we often, I think, we tend to think about using our purchasing power to make social impact. Is there any other way that you kind of want to define it, or how you describe it, or how does your organization exhibit social procurement in its day-to-day workings? Who'd like to take all of those questions on at once, and we can go from there.
I'd love to lift up one if I could to start, and that's, I think that this has been a theme that's been recurring through the conference, the pre-conference and yesterday, and that is that not only are, social enterprises engaged in, the triple bottom line or looking at broad definitions of value and impact, but we are purchasers of goods and services as well. So we really are in an opportunity to model that which we're recommending that more broadly for communities. So as an example, Choices for Youth, Impact Construction provide all of the snow clearing for Stella Circle properties, and likewise we Choices for Youth have procured or secured Stella Circle Clean Start to provide commercial cleaning for their buildings and sites. So just right there are 2 services that both organizations so need, but they're lifting up impact across the lifespan for youth with Choices and the folks that we do the workforce development and training with.
It's really interesting that, and I'm going to ask this to the audience now. I don't know if interaction's allowed, but let me ask it anyway. How many of you think about making a social impact when you go about your daily purchases? Is it something that you consciously think about? Okay, some of you. And are there people who want to more think about it, kind of make it more of something that you see every day when you're purchasing your items? So that's a really interesting conversation then, in terms of how do you let people know about the social impact that you're making, and what is that social impact? So Marlene, do you want to talk a little bit about some of that and how you make the impact, and how do you communicate that to people?
Yes, and that's a very timely question. So I am a recent, grad of the social procurement professional certification through By Social Canada. And what was interesting through that training was that I was one of the only people in that particular cohort who was coming from the lens of being a service provider or a vendor. So it was, for me, it was interesting. Once again, we'll use the hat reference. I'm thinking about our own businesses and how we can enact and build our own social procurement policy, but then how I best prove, state, recognize my value in our social enterprise, or our value in our social enterprises, so that when social procurement comes down the pipe and people start adopting it, how they might be able to, find us, and not just find us, but be attracted to what it is we're offering. I mean, ultimately, again, to go back to purchasing power, we're all spending money and businesses all have something to offer. So how do we make that messaging really clear, and how do we get ourselves out there? But also understanding that every time someone makes a financial decision, they have their own reason for buying what they're buying or spending how they're spending. So how to pack the most value into what it is we're doing. So to follow up on what Rob had said, Impact Construction does the snow clearing from Rob, but then, we buy oil, we have maintenance done, we're buying vehicles. There's a huge spend tied to the snow clearing service. So making sure that when we advertise, it's beyond just you receiving the social, feather for your hat that you chose us, but also here are all the other reasons why. So if environmental is important to you, can we plug in there? So what are people like the City of St. John's, like the government of Newfoundland and Labrador looking for when they go and put these tenders out? So for me, I was approaching it from a bunch of different angles and recognizing I'm getting slightly off track, but it is a lot to unpack. But as a service provider, we want to make sure that we are as transparent as possible, and that we are walking the walk, not just in terms of practice, but our own purchasing. So it's become a full experience for the providers as well as the people looking to adopt these policies.
So if we move to Aon and Craig now, in terms of, slightly different organizations, and how do you approach social procurement, either as a purchaser or a vendor? Like, what is your perspective? Do you want to start, Aon, and then maybe we'll go to Craig?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Lisa. And I think the examples you guys are providing are excellent. I think at Seafair we do both, right? Like all of us, we're a buyer and a supplier in this space. I think social procurement gives us a really interesting lens on how to do this in a progressive way. But I was talking to a couple of folks at lunchtime, and I think there's a broader lens of just like progressive procurement, right? So we think about some of the presentations we saw this morning, people talking about supporting equity-seeking groups, or thinking about environmental purchasing, or thinking about local. All of those things in some ways tie back to this notion of social. But I think when we buy as an organization, we try to think at that broad progressive lens. And so for us, what that means is trying to buy local. It means being intentional about transitioning our fleets to electric over time. We have a few of our organizations that are going through the B Corp certification process, which is super exciting and very kind of reflective as kind of you go through those questions and you answer those kind of forms and go through that auditing process. And so for us, it plays out in those ways. But I think it's also part of corporate identity for us. We're a locally owned organization. We're a female-owned organization. And so it's important to us that like local wins whenever possible. And local wins doesn't mean local exclusively, right? A lot of deals can be done where local is a part of it, or you can involve more players to win together rather than kind of win on your own. And so that's always been a big part of how we think about buying. On the supplier side, a lot of what we do is direct delivery of care. So there's like a social component built into that. And so when we think about what are the outcomes that we're achieving, what's the impact that we're having, I think we'd love to see more dialogue around that. Often it's just about the service was done or not and what was the cost. And I'm sure some people have kind of had those experiences too. But as we shift more into kind of healthcare solutions and technology and thinking about broader impact in health, where we're finding ourselves going more and more this notion of value. So value-based healthcare is really kind of what we're thinking about from a supplier point of view. And there's a social connection to that, certainly. But it comes back to probably a little bit what we think is a need for a stronger alignment between how do you bring value-based procurement into those healthcare discussions. So instead of buying software, you're buying a solution. Instead of buying X, you're buying like a reduction in disease profiles. You're purchasing a pace to which someone can go home and live well. And so when you kind of change what is it you're trying to achieve through an outcome, I think that's where things get really excited. So I can share some examples later on today. where we're really trying to take that outcomes-based approach in the way we're designing and proposing solutions. And I think that is hopefully the way forward, because it brings more people into the tent. It allows you to design your solutions around a desired state versus kind of the nitty-gritty of whatever product or kind of software that you're kind of trying to put out there. So that's how we've tried to approach it as a supplier, and we've had some wins and some challenges along that area, but I know that's an active thing that we're all kind of talking through. So I'd love to see more dialogue across those different lenses of procurement, I guess.
Yeah, so for us, sort of similar, Aon, on the procurement side, I mean, we're relatively small company, so we're not the provincial government, so our procurement would be modest in comparison. But that doesn't matter. I mean, I think that's still 80% of the employers or employment in Canada is through small business, or close to that. So small businesses do matter, and set an example. So if small businesses, if all SMEs were more socially responsible and focused on ESG and DEI, we would have a much greater impact nationally than if we were, than if the federal government or provincial governments did it, for example, or large corporations. Everyone should do it. But sometimes it's easier for small organizations to do, especially when it comes to buying local and supporting local services. Now, we're a software company, so we're pretty light on our, 70% of our expenditures are on staff, payroll. But we buy a lot of software ourselves. We're various platforms and services. So we can, those aren't available locally, but what we do is we make sure, especially as we went through our B Corp certification process, we started looking at, well, we've always thought about these things, but how do we be more deliberate about it? How do we make sure that the companies that we buy from are, social benefit organizations, and to what degree? And then I think that, I mentioned this as well at the beginning, but, as we started thinking about this, like I mentioned this at another session the other day, I think that companies, people should do things like this, corporate social responsibility. You should do it, and you're not doing it for the attention, you're not doing it for the marketing, you're doing it for the right reasons. But at the same time, I think that it's important that others see you do it, because if it sets that example. So in small business, the more we see it, the more it's gonna happen. On the other side, as a vendor, when we looked at this, we're starting to see in more and more RFPs. We do a lot of public sector. We sell a lot to public sector, mostly municipalities across North America. And what we're starting to see in RFPs more and more is asking us about our ESG and DEI and our social benefit of our business. So B Corp made sense in a lot of ways for us to help us be more deliberate about what we're doing, more transparent. But I'll just make an analogy for a business who's a vendor. A certification like B Corp is very valuable, and I think it's going to be a lot more valuable in the coming years, and not too long. Because, so for example, we're a software vendor, so security, privacy, and data privacy and security is very important to our customers. And all of your customers don't want to come in and do a complete due diligence on us to see what's your privacy and security. So when we can say that we've got SOC 2 certification, they just know that we've done all that. Right? Just the same as, like, I come from insurance. When someone asks you for an insurance certificate, that's really a proxy for them not having to dig into your whole financials and see how responsible you are, so that if something goes wrong, you can pay for it. They just get the insurance certificate. But so I see B Corp certification similar. They look at that and they see that you're B Corp, and they know that you meet certain minimum standards, and that you're a responsible social benefits based organization, and that diversity, equity, and inclusion is important to you, and so on. So I just think it just makes sense, and I guess I'm glad to be here, because I feel like it motivates me even more to be on a mission to make sure that other companies do the same.
It's funny, because I was speaking with someone the other day, and she's the CEO of an organization, and she was saying, I really want to do more in the community. I want to volunteer. I want to do things in the community, but she said, I'm having a really hard time-wise. So many pressures, so many priorities. And so I said to her, you're the CEO of an organization. One of the best ways you can make an impact is through social procurement. Take a look at your policies and what is it that you can achieve through your organization. And so, Anne, I was interested in your comment about values. And I think all organizations have values, and often we look at our values when it comes to things like hiring or strategic planning. Do we look at our values when it comes to purchasing, I wonder? I'm not sure. It's not something that I've particularly thought of before, but I'm curious for all of you, maybe, do you truly look at your values outlined in your organization and say, how am I going to bring these values to life using social procurement? Is that ever a conversation?
Yeah, I can open it up. So we brag a little bit. We recently were just recognized as one of Canada's best managed companies, and we're super proud of that. And in that kind of process, we had to talk a lot about kind of why we thought we deserved that title, and there's also a lot of due diligence and kind of paperwork involved. But a big part of it was values discussion. And one of the things that's been really, I think, really unique at CFAIR is how often we talk about values. So it's kind of the opening agenda item for every executive meeting is that we talk about values. We share a value story so it stays top of mind. We do a lot of purchasing that's based on values, and so we try to line it up with maybe it's community, maybe it's local, or maybe it's around supplier relationships that are really important and we want to invest in. But we do kind of come back to that intentionally, and I think a value-based system is really important in that regard. It shows up in other ways too. Like, we're a group of 6 execs at CFAIR, and it could be a big deal to say one person is person of color, but I'm proud to say we've got 2 women and 2 people of color on a 6-person exec. That I don't know if that's rare, I don't know if that's a good bar or not, but it feels good, and I think that matters, right? And I think that DEI kind of translates out in terms of how you look at the world, how you make hiring decisions, and how you think about how you use your purchasing power. So when we're buying food, when we're hiring students, when we're booking conference events, we look at ownership. We look at who's the last person we bought food from, or what's the new restaurant that was opened by an immigrant recently. Like, those things are active conversations so that we can kind of spread out some of that purchasing power. And I think that plays through, and when we go and do advocacy as a vendor, we hope that integrity and that those values come through as well when we're advocating to be on the other side of it.
I think in considerations for an existing not-for-profit community agency like Stella Circle, that social enterprise emerged, grew out of the organization. I totally think it's a two-way reflection. The values of the organization inform, and the vision, the mission are the very fact that, the Stella Circle, I'm reasonably certain, wouldn't be, in the food service industry or the commercial cleaning or doing, construction and renovation work if it didn't somehow align with and, benefit from and benefit the participants that we serve. So the short answer is it's both. The values inform, and it's a touchstone. It's a guide. It's a guide forward to always make sure that, because there's there's a very dynamic tension that exists naturally between sometimes how we leverage in a work integrated social enterprise, which is primarily what we do, the tension between the best experiences, the best opportunities for inclusion and authentic training, experiential learning happen when we're busy. That's why social procurement conversation is of such interest to us, because it infuses predictability in those opportunities for workforce development and skills. And we really do come from a place that the best social program is a job. A phrase that was I first heard to my left maybe a few years ago, but really valuable. But just to say that is that's the values piece, and it can enrich the enterprise, and it enrich, in our example, I think it enriches the organization too, and the people we
Craig,
serve.
do you want to go at that one? I'm assuming
Yeah.
values played a big role in the B Corp certification.
Well, yeah, they do, and that was, again, one of the reasons we didn't just try to shoehorn ourselves into a B Corp. it was already a very good fit. It was actually, not much work, just documenting what we were doing. So we're very much a values-forward organization. Our values are caring, trust, and fun. They all have meaning. The caring part is where a lot of what we're talking about here today comes in. We care about, our people and diversity and the environment and, so on, some of the things that we're talking about. So in everything we do, like yesterday, I like to do some of the orientation with all new staff. So we had a couple yesterday, and I think in an hour, I think I spent a third of the time talking about our values. And giving examples and stuff, because it's so important, because it's everything that we do. So in terms of procurement, absolutely, we always think about that, and it gets to a point when you got to be deliberate about it for a while, but it becomes muscle memory after a while, and you don't have to stop and say, well, we got to make sure that we're, there's social benefit to this purchase. It just becomes part of what you do. So.
I think too, so if we, similar to Rob, our social enterprises are employment-based in that is the outcome for the people that we employ. But what really is, I'm really curious about with social procurement policy is that every young person that works with us will need to transition out and into post-secondary or a competitive job. So, social procurement, for us right now, obviously, we're applying that practice to our purchasing for our social enterprises, but I'm really interested and curious about what the creation and encouragement of creating social procurement policy will do for the employment space. So a social procurement policy is going to be unique based on every company and organization that adopts one. So based on whatever that is, where can we tie in employment? And that's important, because when we hire for social enterprise to come and do a startup, generally it's someone who has an entrepreneurship background, has worked in the local sector, is connected to making things like social procurement a little bit easier because they're already purchasing locally, things like that. So that part is almost like, okay, step one, that's great. Now, step two, as we get ready to move these trainees on out into real business, who is looking to be an inclusive hirer, who is looking to change their hiring model, and how can social procurement play into that? So everything that we do, from the partnerships that we make, the people we hire, to the purchases that we make, are all working towards that goal of furthering education and employment for young people. And so I'm just really, again, less to answer the question, but just really want to state that curiosity of how we can get that social procurement policymaking married to employment. So.
Well, I think that's a great question for us to ask. And along the same lines as, how do we as organizations, but also from a provincial perspective, what needs to happen in order to rise up social procurement? So to have more organizations and people thinking about it. What do you think? I guess in a way I'm asking you, what are the barriers at the moment? But what needs to happen so that we can push social procurement ahead further? And maybe a question, whoever wants to jump in first.
I've never been accused of not speaking up loud enough before. Louder.
You got the mic now, sorry.
Oh.
You got to continue. You got to continue.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, repeat the question, please.
What needs to happen?
Caroline distracted me.
Yeah. What needs to happen? Sorry, I shouldn't have picked on you. What needs to happen either within organizations or from a provincial perspective in order to move forward the whole social procurement conversation or activity?
Well, I think this is important here, for sure, these types of forums. And as I mentioned before, I mean, leading by example and talking about it, we're all involved in different things. We're all on board. So over the years, make sure that you're bringing this approach into the boards. That's right. Caroline is on the board of the Institute of Corporate Directors, the ICD board, and those are professional board members on lots of boards. So I think the guerrilla marketing approach is very effective. And so, you know, again, I think as Newfoundlanders, I'll never forget, Newfoundlanders, we kind of hide, where most Newfoundlanders aren't showy about things, and if they make a donation, they'll make it anonymously, or you're not doing it for praise or acknowledgement. I have that inclination, but the sharing it is important. If others don't know you're doing it, they're not going to follow your example. So I think we have a responsibility not just to be good corporate citizens and think about social benefit, but we have a responsibility to make sure that we promote it in all facets of our life, so that others see it as it's normalized. And we see that in lots of movements that have happened over the decades. If we're not talking about it, if we're not leading by example, others aren't as comfortable to do it.
And to add on to what you said, Craig, it's interesting. I was chatting with the current cohort of Masters of Social Enterprise students earlier, and we were talking about, to go back to the value of a dollar. And so when it comes to community engagement and how people show up and support, so there are lots of people, like you said, who are willing to donate, for example, to Choices for Youth. So you want to do something, you want to be involved. We've got a social procurement policy. We're putting it out there. How can I support? People are, by being transparent and offering what we've offered, we've created this, fantastic experience, and I'll use the neighborhood for an example. So I've had countless individuals come up to me and say, I've always wanted to help out Choices for Youth, but, I can't. I feel like I've got to write a big check or do something, but I can come here and shop, and I'm thrifting anyway, and I know that all of the spend is going into your organization. I mean, once again, it's literally written on the wall where the money goes. And so, again, being very vocal and very transparent and very open about what it is that you do, showing up at events like this. The coalition has certainly been an excellent step forward, especially if that's who potentially the government may be looking to inform some of this work. But to your question, what needs to happen? I think we need to see some sort of movement from people who may just be a little bit bigger than us. Do something, say something, enact something around social procurement, so that people outside our audience that we tend to get all the time are starting to ask questions and wonder what it is, And we have these conversations all day long, but how do you bring people into the room? And that's through engagement. We as partners can sit in this room every day of the week, but until we start getting more people in the room, and I think every one of us can contribute to that effort in different ways. And I'm really happy to have you all here today, of course, but just keep the conversation going. Don't think of social procurement as something that you're waiting, like it's going to be a new rule, and all of a sudden if you break it, there's going to be like jail time or something attached to it. Like, a social procurement policy is simply considering the money you're already spending and how can we perhaps fix some of the problems that we are facing right now as a community, as a province, as a country. So it's not a big scary thing. So we need to talk about it. We need to have spaces that are open and attractive to people besides the people in this room. And I am super glad you're all here, to be clear.
Can I jump back in for 1 second? I'm sorry. There was a National Post article this week. David brought my attention to it the other day, and I read it since. They put a negative spin on social procurement by the federal government. So I think there's a lot of, like a lot of things, misinformation out there about it. So I think that we, in addition to, I think another responsibility we have is to make sure people really understand what it is and the benefits of it, and not to take away some of the vilification that's done of it, the people trying to protect what they have.
When I think about barriers, my mind goes to three things. I'll try to be quick. I think one is like who's in this room, right? Like when we think about social procurement, I think the tent needs to be a lot bigger. I think naturally the way this has emerged, I'm guessing most folks in this room are from the nonprofit sector or from the government sector. And so I don't know who's from private other than Craig and I. And you model citizens. So I think the tent has got to be bigger, right? Like social procurement is not just nonprofits and social enterprises, it's social purpose organizations. And there's a lot of ways to think about what that definition is, whether it's impact-oriented or equity-deserving groups, or just the way you think about kind of why your business exists. So I think that full spectrum of SPOs need to be part of this conversation. So I think that's going to be really important to succeed. I think another point is education within those who are activating procurement. I know there's some great work and leadership happening around procurement legislation and kind of how we think about that from a legislative point of view and a leadership point of view. But kind of as procurement kind of works its way through the system, even as it is today, or in the future state with really great clauses, the folks who are kind of doing the evaluation or setting up these specifications, I think there's a lot of room for education around how to interpret that legislation to maximize the social outcome or to maximize the value that we want to achieve through those kind of procurement clauses. And I think there's a lot of room for that, certainly on the supplier education, but I think also on the people involved in the mechanics of the evaluation and awarding, whether it's an RFP or a tender, whatever it is. The last thing is, I think we've learned over time that demonstration of impact does not result in like implementation, right? Like, back in the day when I was at Choices, we saw that, and right now at Seafair, certainly some of the solutions we're bringing forward, we can really demonstrate how this option or this solution will have this tangible impact, and we can measure that in a value-based way, whether it's cost savings at the hospitals or whether it's better patient outcomes, whether it's any kind of varying ways of identifying that value. And even the way those solutions are pitched, to think about them as a co-owned model or a savings-only model where you kind of benefit in the savings that are achieved or the impact that's achieved for a client, those things get stuck even after the impact is demonstrated. And so I think there's this need to solve how we take great ideas that are proven and have evidence and kind of give them a path through procurement that's hopefully a little smoother than we're seeing today.
I think there are great examples. I think we're at a unique time, and maybe there's a convergence of thought, a paradigm shift, call it what you will, but the alignment of values. And I think that, for example, when we think of maybe not a siloed approach from the perspective of business practices, the marketplace, business acumen, health services, the Health Accord and its recommendations and the social determinants of health, 60% of our well-being research shows is attributed to the social determinants of health, not necessarily our diet or our level of physical activity or the things that we often associate with health and well-being. So in that way, social procurement really aligns with a lot of what government is doing, will do more of, needs to do. In the case of our own work in employment services with Stella Circle, we have a great partner, right, with the Department of Immigration, Population Growth and Skills, and they fund and support great literacy programming and career development and employment programming. So paying for facets of the labor workforce development that we're talking about as a work integrated social enterprise, but then, just over here, through the purchase of things that are already being purchased anyway, you're helping to contribute to a diverse, inclusive labor market where people are validated and people who learn differently, workplace, experiential learning can be supported. So sometimes I'm so embedded that I get kind of trapped in, well, is it obvious or, but how that gets lifted up collectively, I know that's complicated. It's a complex question, but I do think all the constituent pieces are there to kind of move us in that right direction.
Want to go again?
Yeah, I do. Just also thinking too, social enterprises, just to take it back for a second, we talked about clarity, on what makes a business a social enterprise, and what makes a social procurement policy. So some of these social enterprises, we've been, I can speak from Choice's point of view, again, we're a nonprofit, we've been very fortunate to be awarded, a substantial amount of funding to make this department come alive. But these businesses are all designed and they're hired for intentionally to eventually hit a sustainable point, like where they can operate without funding. So when we have businesses right now that are at that point, so as we look towards moving really into sustainability through growth, we're going to be looking at IRPs and these things. But without people coming and considering social procurement, we've done the work. We know the businesses work. We know they're meeting our mandate, but on their own, to survive, to keep the businesses going and the services going, we need to know what it is folks are looking for. So we know it works when it's funded, and we think it will work when it doesn't, but how does it grow? How does it thrive? We need involvement from community, from public and private sector, and from people who are spending money. So the work can't be left on the social enterprise and the nonprofit to do all of the work. We've made the thing, we're going after the opportunities, we're seeking the funding, now we're saying, okay, we're sustainable, someone needs to give us a shot. So how do we connect those pieces? Because these businesses, a lot of them don't want to stay funded. They don't want to be the recipient of funding because someone thought it was a cute idea for a minute, you know? They're real businesses that contribute to the economy, employ a lot of people, and have legs. So there comes a point where public involvement is super important so we can grow and keep offering the services to the young people we work with, but also to the public. Because a lot of people use our services beyond just supporting a young person. I would argue half of them don't even know we do it. They come there because they want to buy catering or they want to buy used clothes. But in order for us to exist, these things are so important. So that's all, promise.
If I could, Lisa, just to say, I've often commented at the Hungry Heart that, you might come in the first time because it's Stella Circle or it's, it seems notionally like a lovely idea, whichever. But, if you take your seat and, you're waiting 45 minutes for your meal, if Paul brings you cold soup, like all these things, you're not going to come back. So it is that piece to it as well, right? For sure.
Not gazpacho, is it?
Unless it's gazpacho. In which case, yeah.
You certainly don't go in there for their scones, do you? Definitely not. I'm going to look to the audience. Is there anybody with a burning question or comment at the moment? Or otherwise, I will keep going. But shy group at the moment. Oh, Tom. I was thinking, where is Tom? And there he is.
No, Mike, Tom.
Yeah, I've never been accused of shy, just like Craig has never been accused of being quiet. So first time ever. One of the things when I'm listening, when I think about the local context, and I'm surprised nobody's mentioned like the labor movement and what is the role of the labor movement in terms of promoting or engaging and creating social enterprises. Because when we look at the size and the power of a NAPE or a CUPE or an FFAW, et cetera, when Aon was talking about that broad church and having more people in the room, when I look at the 13 years I spent in the UK and the power of the labor movement in driving a lot of social procurement, social and innovation, social element, why do you think that's missing here? Or why aren't they, sorry, there may be somebody in the room here, and it may look like a stupid question, but that's one of the things when I look at this ecosystem, which I know is the next panel, just curious, like, why do you think they're missing?
It's a very good question. Luckily, I'm not a panelist, so I'm not answering.
Can I ask you to restate that initial part of that question?
What is the role of organized labor
Right, yeah.
in moving forward social procurement and social innovation as a result?
I mean, I don't know, Tom, if they're not. Maybe they are. I haven't really looked into that. But it's a really good question because certainly influential groups. And, you were talking about, what's required for this to, really become mainstream. And you need a groundswell, you need people. And I guess if you've got labor movement behind it, that's a lot of people, right? You can move governments and large corporations with your wallet, right? Buying decisions. So I would imagine the buying power and the influence of, like you said, the labor movement is substantial. So yeah, I don't have any direct experience, but it's an excellent point.
It is a great observation, because labor movements were born out of making society better, and presumably this is one way we all think we can do that. So it's a really good question, and maybe specific outreaches need to be made to those labor groups, because I can't say that I personally have seen, there any level of involvement.
I think our funding models probably have a lot to do with it. Those of us who are working from a nonprofit space involving, that approach gets a little trickier because your funding for employment isn't necessarily as straightforward as it would be in private sector. So I think there are people having conversations. Actually, I know there are people having conversations about it, but I know that's something to consider. But as businesses go into sustainability and get away from being funded, certainly there could be potential there. But
It's a really interesting question, Tom. I think, to Lisa's point, there's a strong values alignment about making this part of the world and where we live as good as it can be, right? We often talk about at our kind of conversations when we get our teams together, like we're trying to make our corner of the world kind of the best place it can be, right? And so there's a strong alignment there. Our service organizations are within our group, they're all organized labor. And so I think maybe it is around outreach and opportunities to kind of think about things in that way. I know B Corp has taken us down that road a little bit. There's a whole domain within the B Corp dimensions that's specifically around workers and kind of looking at living wages, looking at how are they treated, how do we do kind of worker acknowledgement, and how do we do hiring. So some of that comes through B Corp, but I think more broadly in this social impact, social procurement arena, I think to Lisa's point, it may be thinking about that church, right? Like are we sending out the right invites? To everybody, yeah.
So didn't Tim bring up earlier in his presentation about the construction trades union that they've embraced, the inclusion of a diverse population, right, in the youth, and that's an example, Tom, that within that construction trades area. That's the only thing that I can kind of think of. But Tim, our prior speaker, just prior to lunch, had talked about that. And I mean, that would be a really hard nut to crack, I would think, into that construction trades unions. But it seems to be working. I'm trying to remember back to what he said, but it seems to be that inclusion is very, it's good. And
Yeah, for sure. And he did make it very clear, though, that they were not in the provision of wraparound services or supports, that rather than to enter into something that is outside the industry specific, they would partner with organizations like Choices and ourselves and others to provide those supports. So
I seem to think that, correct me if anybody else is interpreting it differently, but they're bringing the youth in under the premise of apprenticeship.
Yep.
And that's what they do in the construction trades. It just happens to be that the company is investing in those wraparound supports by another agency to bring that in. So I guess the talent pool is so stretched right now that the union maybe is welcoming a whole different set of employees that wouldn't normally come in through a different or a typical channel. So maybe that's it. But that might have been one example that we heard just before lunch. A really good question.
Thanks a lot, Tom. Any other questions from anyone? Hi, we're going to get a mic to you so everybody can hear online and in person.
Like Vanna. Here you go. Thank you.
Hi, I'm just wondering what, if anything, you're seeing in the private sector. So I know what we're doing in the public sector, when we're working on this policy and that sort of thing. And I know, we've had dealings with your organizations, whether it be catering or you've helped us with renovations or that sort of thing. So I'm just wondering if you're seeing any movement in the private sector, is half your business wrapped up in the private sector? Is it largely public still? And obviously, I think when we come out with this policy, we hope to affect some of that and create some change. David made reference to that of things he's seeing in Vancouver because they've implemented public policies that the private sector is moving in that direction. So I'm just wondering what you're seeing now, though, on the ground. Is there any public sector organizations coming to you guys, for example? Or how does that look?
I could kick us off with just a couple of quick examples. There's In one instance, I know we have a contract with a government department that involves provision of cleaning services, where the RFP specifically wanted training and workforce development included in it. So it was kind of at source that and so there wasn't looking for consideration for the input or the extra effort that we put into that training, because that was already being asked for. And so that was a really interesting. That's an interesting example for sure. And then on the just with the private partnerships, I think what we've seen, it's fair to say, at Stella Circle is the depth of the relationship with the private sector. So just really quickly, 2017, I remember it was May, and our community choir was at Rollins Cross, and we were singing for Mental Health Week. And at the same time, across Rollins Cross in the Hungry Heart Cafe, there was a group of people assembled because one of our private organization donors had hired the cafe to do a fundraiser for some folks who were immigrating to Canada, and this was to generate revenue. And in the meantime, we were just down the road cleaning their offices while they were up having. So I had this moment of like intersecting benefits and multiple, through the richness of the relationship. And that same organization would donate to Light Up Hope or other initiatives that we're doing. So it's the richness and multiple levels that I think we see behind the values of, to Craig's example and Aon's as well. That's where, the particular example I'm thinking of, Heather, I think they would hold that up and say, you know what, that has benefit for retention of even our staff, because our staff, that's the values of our staff, and they want to see that kind of dynamic and creative engagement with folks who are trying to leverage participation, inclusion, and for people in a diverse workforce.
Anyone else? Tom?
How effective, sorry, I'm trying to make it really simple, like Marilyn won't get angry this time. How effective would be a form of industrial benefits agreements, and if we took out the word industrial and put in social benefit agreements, would it be in a resource-based economy like Newfoundland, Labrador, whereby social purpose organizations would be given kind of a ladder up in the queue around contracts that come from resource-based companies like Marathon Gold, for example, out in central Newfoundland, Labrador, or even Craig in your world, the tech world, in terms of tech companies moving in here because you've created, sorry, not you, but you've been part of the ecosystem that's created all these amazing companies that are coming out. Would that form of government regulation or government intervention be useful in terms of thinking, so taking the same thing that they've done in the oil and gas sector around industrial benefits and applying it into the social sector around social procurement?
I don't know if I can answer that directly, Tom, but I think there is some role for government to think about the application of different regulations and legislation to kind of drive a specific outcome, right? So in this case, it's community-based benefit of some kind. But I think there's more domains than that, right? And so it could be for health outcomes. It could be to drive innovation and the growth of local small companies into larger impact organizations. So I think there is certainly regulatory tools we could use to influence how buying decisions are made to achieve a certain outcome and support certain actors along the way. So broadly speaking, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think along the way, though, we can't let the vendors or suppliers off the hook. Right, so I think it was one of the presentations from either Heather or Amy around, can you deliver the product, can you deliver the service, right? That's one of the self-reflective pieces before you even go down that road. And I think there's an appetite amongst the folks who want to play in this SPO space that you can prove the impact, you can get the work done, but there's also some creative ways where we can think about risk sharing or really being clear around the savings and kind of monetizing agreements based on the savings, and so allows a certain level of kind of buy-in and commitment from all those involved. If we went purely on a regulatory basis and priority basis, I think we may lose some of the ability to ensure the outcomes were being achieved along the way. So I think it's a mix of regulations to help influence how decisions are made, but then also some creativity in the way we structure RFPs to really go after value and creative ways of making sure everyone at the table is clear on the outcome and believes they can get there. We've over the last year put forward a few ideas where, we've decided there's no cost. We are so confident in this solution. We will take on the risk, and we think there's enough savings that we will negotiate a percentage off of that. And not everything is going to work that way, but I think it's important that we start thinking about that in the ways we think about procurement as a way to achieve outcomes in the social sector.
Did you want to add? You sure?
Wouldn't want to make me mad.
Tom said that, not me, for the record. Those things would absolutely help, right? I mean, so if labor unions are pushing this, if various government regulatory agencies are pushing this, absolutely. It's going to move organizations forward. So, look, we're all going there. It's just a matter of how quick we get there. The quicker the better. So I think those things are positive. I think just like I mentioned in the article in National Post, there's pushback. Whenever there's change, there's people who see themselves as potential losers, and they lose what they have. And I think we're seeing that in a lot of places around the world now. I think that's very common. Because the world is changing rapidly, and the haves are afraid that they're losing. So I think that's the biggest challenge, Tom, and because, it's hard for government. Look what's going to happen down south of the border now. The government's going to change largely because of, I think, a lot of stuff we're talking about here. People are seeing themselves as being disenfranchised. So, governments are going to take those things into consideration, right? How popular is something. So I think that the groundswell is important. It's important that the education is important, that people understand. This is not a zero-sum game, and the benefits to everybody in our communities of this approach. But yes, it would help, but I think it's not that straightforward.
And to go back to my comment about as businesses are looking perhaps towards growth phase or what sustainability could look like, certainly having a leg up depending on what that leg was maybe could help shape some of the decision making that we're doing. We talk often about, in particular, impact construction. Our other businesses are front-facing. They are, they are straight exchange, good for money. But this is a service. So for a long time, we talked a lot about on time, on budget, sacrificing nothing, still getting the social benefit. And a lot of the time, it doesn't always happen. So maybe, if that leg up looks like a little bit of negotiation or perhaps accommodation or whatever it may be, so that we can get the job done to the best of the agreement, and then the outcome of that is, it's employment. And if that was a part of someone's social procurement mandate, then there's ways that we can hit your social value and tie in our own practices as well, and kind of make it work for everybody. But again, opening up that conversation is going to help some of us be able to deliver to the best of our ability, because we kind of need to know what you're looking for. What can we compromise on? Can we be all things? In some cases, yes. In some cases, no. So yeah, opening that conversation up, and again, speaking from a very live situation that I'm in, this conversation is crucially important.
Following up on, and this will be the last question and then we'll wrap up, but following up on Tom's question, it really leads nicely into evaluation. And we live in a world where lowest price seems to reign supreme. And so how do we get at that evaluation and communicating that impact from social procurement? And there's lots of tangliness with evaluation when it comes to outcomes and social impact, but how do you do it, if you do it, or how should we be doing it? And if you don't want to answer that, you can say whatever you want. But I'll start. I'll start with Rob, and we'll work our way down. So this will be your last opportunity to comment. So you can take it from there.
Again, in our context, as a not-for-profit, that social enterprise is part of our strategy and approach to service delivery and impact. We, and as a charity, our financial statements are published on our website. We've worked really hard to develop a culture of evaluation. So a number of third-party evaluations are also available on our website. I think it's one thing to say what you're going to do, but I think it is important to show what you are doing as well. We do that. Again, we're very fortunate this way. We report quarterly to our board, our governance board. So there's a board scorecard that Lisa would be familiar with. And our funding and our mission, our deliverables and service agreements with the province and other donors, we record and communicate that to anyone that invests in us. So I just would say that I think that's a critical piece, both to say that things are going well and we'll do more of this, or to say, I think we need to change some things, and think nothing more of the pandemic. And I'll leave you with this from a social enterprise lens. We have a cleaning business, and you can imagine, and I think I said this on the panel yesterday, cleaning during a pandemic, and we offer disinfecting services. So the fortunes of Clean Start from the perspective of demand were one way, and the market, and then you think of a cafe that all of a sudden wasn't set up to do delivery, and it was, nobody could kind of come in and nobody was working and ordering a lunch like we had today. So two very different fortunes.
Yeah, evaluation is so important, especially as we think about things beyond price, which is where we all want to get. And so I think if this is our last chance, I will talk about value-based healthcare, and really that's about designing for patient experience, for health outcomes and system performance, right? And so if you think about it in the context of healthcare, when there's an RFP or something is being purchased, I think if we're taking a true value-based lens on this stuff, what we measure becomes critically important, right? And so I'll share one example from one of the projects we're involved in. We've put forward an idea on how to better manage discharge through a digital solution that focuses on ALC. So ALC is this classification in the healthcare system that stands for alternative level of care. And you're effectively ALC when you no longer need to be in the hospital, but you're still in the hospital for whatever reason. So it might be you're waiting on one other piece of information, or maybe you're waiting for oxygen to get set up at home, or there's some coordination issue, whatever reason you're still there. ALC is a huge issue right now. It's about 20% of the beds in Newfoundland. And so when we put this solution forward and we think about what would we want it to be evaluated on, certainly price is going to matter, and does the technology work is going to matter. But from a value-based point of view, what's really going to matter is did the patient have a better experience getting out of the hospital? Did we reduce the likelihood of rehospitalization 2 weeks later? And so there's totally different things you're measuring, even though you're buying a piece of software. So if this was purely a software buy in a traditional procurement model, it would be entirely about the bells and whistles of the software. No one would even check, what did readmission look like? What was the patient experience? Did this allow discharge planners and nurses to get more of their time back for clinical interventions versus administrative burdens? Those are the kinds of things we can measure and monetize, because then you can talk about, okay, how many more beds did we get back? How many more nursing hours did we free up? How many readmissions did we avoid? And those are all things you can actually measure and put a dollar figure to as well. And so I think when we talk about evaluation, that RFI or that supplier engagement on some of these more novel ideas and novel solutions is so important, because in many contexts around innovation, it may not have been done before, or there's no equivalency. And so if we don't have that conversation early, we often end up with a misalignment between the evaluation criteria and what you're actually trying to solve for. So I think it's really important that evaluation is a critical part of discussions as we go down social procurement or value-based healthcare, anything that's beyond traditional procurement.
Yeah, great points, Ayan. I just think about, let's just take, climate change, the environment as an example. If you're doing procurement and you're not considering the risk associated with climate change to your business and the world that we live in and the community that you're in, and you're willing to take the lowest bidder, even though they're the biggest polluter, and take any other element we're talking about. How you treat your employees. Are we going to take the lowest bidder because they treat their employees horribly and don't pay them a living wage? How's that? I mean, that's very, very small, short-term thinking, and that's what we need to change. So hopefully, again, we vote with our wallets and we vote at the ballot box, but we absolutely. I mean, the world is burning. Right? Take the environmental issue. I mean, there can't be any compromise there. So those things absolutely have to be valued more than they have been in the past when we're doing evaluations. There's just, I don't know, how anybody could debate to the contrary.
Similar to Ann's point, and interesting that you brought this up, Craig, evaluation, data, stats, those are the things that I personally thrive on, but also are certainly key when it comes to both the nonprofit mission that Choices for Youth has and what we do, but also as individual businesses. So it's easy for us to say that, every time you shop here or you avail of this, it provides this many employment hours. So again, to go to COVID-19 and businesses are in shutdown. So because we're offering core service delivery beyond just employment to a large number of our trainees, closing shop, while that was the mandate for a while, wasn't possible in terms of youth engagement. So all of a sudden, we're looking at ways to keep young people involved we're measuring everything anyway for the funding lens, but also for our operational lens, and inadvertently building value to our business. So all of a sudden, the neighborhood thrift store wasn't open, but appropriate textile was getting diverted to the shop where youth could come in and work safely in designated spaces and produce rag that was being sold in huge amounts to companies who were cleaning incessantly. And Stella's cleaners were also in the building cleaning, and face masks were being produced at rapid speed. So all of a sudden, that storytelling that Dave keeps mentioning becomes greater, and our business story gets greater, and all of a sudden, we have this zero waste mandate that we've been toying around with, but not really wanting to speak to because we didn't really have it on lock. And now we have all these stats and stories and real-time examples and revenue that's come from this concept. So it's gone far beyond just the youth hours. I mean, working with the people that we work with, it's not abnormal that at any point there may not be any hours that day, but we were still able to hit, X% of our budgeted revenue and provide this environmental, give back and. So, I mean, data and stats have so much value in everything that we do every day, but certainly when it comes to procurement, I mean, if anybody just says what they're looking for, we can probably find a way to plug it in. It's probably there if you really just unpack it. A lot of this is work we're doing anyway. So that's it for me.
Well, thank you, everyone, and thank you to our panelists for sharing your wisdom with us, and thank you for your listening. Thank you to our interpreters. You're so impressive. I don't know how you do what you do, truly. Thank you. And to our CITL folks for making sure that this is accessible as possible. Thank you very much, and to the organizers. So thank you, everybody.